Good evening and welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, the rise of the Wolfpack, a crew of Canadian gangsters running operations connected to Mexican cartels. They are ruthless in their revenge killings, and they will even track their own.
They were running around the car back and forth like so, and the car was trying to get away.
Bullets flying everywhere. It was a broad daylight assassination.
Shooter literally walked up to the table and shot him point blank range.
People are running for cover, ducking. There's chaos.
Just heard some gunshots, about 4 or 5 gunshots, and just saw everybody running. It's pretty freaky.
Pretty brazen attack. He was calm, cool, and collected, and just strolled off after he committed the homicide. Rabih Alkhalil, his name came up.
This is a guy with really next level intelligence.
My phone starts blowing up and I see Alkhalil's escaped and I'm like, oh my God, oh my God.
A dangerous gangster facing murder charges can escape. It's a slap in the face to the justice system.
Sometimes you feel like you're watching Mission Impossible.
Here now is Jules Knox with The Hunt for the Wolfpack.
The roundabout at this fancy hotel is a constant hub of activity. Tourists coming and going from the Delta Grand Hotel, right in the heart of downtown Kelowna, British Columbia.
August in Kelowna, beautiful day, lots of tourists in town, the Grand Hotel's right down on the waterfront. It's the heart of the cultural district. There's people everywhere. It's definitely a destination spot for out-of-town visitors.
Including this man, 30-year-old Jonathan Bacon. But his presence here was about to change everything. As he checked into the hotel, he was being hunted. Somebody wanted him dead at any cost. 3 hitmen were watching and waiting. On August 14th, 2011, they seized their opportunity.
The targeted vehicle is leaving the Grand Hotel when 2 gunmen run up to the car, guns a-blazing, basically shooting at the car. As it's moving, it slowly moves off the plaza into a grassy area and stops when it hits a tree. Beside all the shooters and everything are tourists jumping out of their cars, leaping out of their cars, running away.
This pop, 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 pop. We actually thought it was it sounded like construction, because that's what we originally thought it was. And then I peeked around the corner and I saw this guy come out with an assault rifle about this long. And he had a balaclava on, and he was going like this, shooting out of the casino, and then I bolted, I ran.
They were running around the car back and forth like so, and the car was trying to get away.
There was a call across the scanner that the newsroom heard, and it was by the tone of the voice of the dispatcher and the call what was going on that something was happening at the Grand Hotel. Our cameraman was out the door right away to see what was going on. Emergency crews were just descending on the place the same time he arrived there. Fire, ambulance, police, tourists running around screaming, crying, people bewildered, shaken, trembling at what had happened.
We were right there, and the shootout broke out right here. We were almost in the middle of it. We ran that way and hid. And it went on for 30 seconds, I would guess. They were persistent in their efforts. They wanted to get those guys.
Anybody hit, do you know?
It sure looks like it. If they didn't, they're not very good shots because they were right there.
Pretty much just seen some guy unload a clip. He was over there, ran back out here, ran back in, unloading the clip, jumped in a Silver Explorer and booked it that way. He's firing at the white Porsche Cayenne, yeah.
And what did you hear?
Pop, pop, pop. It's pretty scary.
And what did you do? Look over immediately?
No. Everyone kind of went running. There was screeching.
I would say it sounded like AK-47.
AK-47?
Yeah, I would say so. It was real loud. Really loud.
These guys had their minds made up. This was their opportunity to get who they wanted to get. and nothing was going to stand in their way. It was a broad daylight assassination in a very crowded plaza, bullets flying everywhere.
Several stray bullets from all the gunfire hit the outside wall of that hairdresser's building attached to the hotel complex. And have a look at this. You can see here in the window of the art gallery across the street from the hotel, there's a bullet hole.
A total of 5 people were in the targeted car, including 2 women who were both shot, one of them becoming quadriplegic.
And then there was a person in that car that we didn't realize was in the car at first. The police didn't know he was in the car. He just was able to walk away, and our cameras catch him walking away, talking to somebody briefly, just blend into the crowd basically.
That's James Riach. At the time, he was an independent soldiers gangster.
The assassins escaped, tires squealing, in what witnesses say was a Ford SUV. About 3 hours later, the getaway vehicle is found destroyed on a remote road in Lake Country north of Kelowna. It had been torched to destroy any evidence left inside. This afternoon, the burned-out suspect vehicle was brought to the police station for forensic processing, while the wounded victims remain under police guard at the Kelowna hospital.
Victim, who is it? Is it Mr. Bacon?
We are not confirming that at this point in time. In fact, we are not releasing or confirming the names of any persons involved.
One person dead, what's the condition of the others? Is anyone else possibly going to die from their wounds?
At this point in time, I can't confirm if anyone is in serious condition. I know that several others did sustain gunshot wounds.
If you can confirm so few facts, how can you be assuring people that the community is probably not in danger?
Well, what we do know is that it appeared that all the shots fired were directed towards one particular vehicle. Had these persons been wanting to affect the public at large, there likely would have been shots directed towards many people, as there were a lot of people in the area.
Word came out who the victim was. It was Jonathan Bacon, infamously known in BC as one of the Red Scorpions. And there'd been an ongoing gang war in the Lower Mainland, so it became apparent that what happened at the Grand was a retribution for something else.
The 3 men in the targeted car, all high-profile members of their own gangs. But together, they formed part of the Wolfpack Alliance. Independent soldier James Riach tumbled to safety. Hell's Angel Larry Amero was shot, his hand badly injured. And Jonathan Bacon was killed.
Jonathan Bacon was the oldest of brothers from Abbotsford, well-off, middle-class, athletic kids who just decided they were going to go big into crime, and they moved into Surrey and they tried to displace the DAC group. They became connected to something called the Red Scorpions, and the Red Scorpions became connected to the Wolfpack. The Wolfpack is a multi-ethnic collection of criminals, generally very young, internet-driven, fueled by drug trafficking, and it's the next stage for organized crime in Canada. It's where the ethnic lines get broken down, and there isn't one clear leader. It's like a collection of powerful interests.
The Wolfpack really is a coalition of opportunity. These independent gangs and individuals saw a way of making more money in the drug trade, of maybe working to take out enemies.
Were you aware that 2 high-ranking notorious gangsters were in Kelowna over the weekend?
I'm not prepared to answer that.
Why not?
Because I'm not.
What, you guys have a gang task force? Were they following them? Was there surveillance?
I'm not answering those questions. Those are intelligence-led questions. We're not going there.
What about repercussions? Are you expecting any, and do you expect it to happen in Kelowna? Further gang shootings?
I think retaliation is something we're very cautious of.
And 5 months later, the Wolfpack went from hunted to hunters.
Welcome back. An escalating gang war in British Columbia has police on edge after a series of brazen killings. We return now to Jules Knox with the hunt for the Wolfpack.
5 months after the Kelowna shooting, there was an uneasy calm outside this upscale Vancouver hotel, the Sheraton Wall Centre. But inside, On January 17, 2012, the lobby was buzzing. Vancouver was hosting a qualifying tournament for the Summer Olympics, and some of the women's soccer teams were staying at the posh hotel.
So you had the Cuban national soccer team staying at the hotel. You had the American soccer team staying at the hotel, including Hope Solo. The Cuban women were in the lobby, as were many other patrons of the hotel. Sundip Duhre had gone in with a friend, sat at this table by the window. His friend, he went out for a smoke.
The shooter arrives nearby, comes in disguise through the revolving glass doors into the lobby. In the lobby, there's a number of people milling about.
And the shooter literally walked up to the table when Duhre was there by himself after ordering food and shot him point blank range.
People are running for cover, ducking, hiding under couches. Basically, most people are running out of the hotel. And it looks like something that you would see in like a terrorist attack. There's chaos, and then there's sort of an eerie quiet. People are now kind of coming up after ducking for cover.
I think all of us were a bit scared. I think that's the reality of the situation. We all travel all around the world, big cities, small cities, and I think it's a normal thing that crime happens.
The one individual that I was speaking to said that he was in the lobby area. He had heard the shots and saw the man escape.
He just leaves out of a side door of the hotel and he's gone.
There was numerous police officers all over the place, and the doors were being locked and the guests had to identify themselves going in and out.
The restaurant wasn't full, but there were dozens of people in the area at the time, if you include patrons and staff. Again, this is an unacceptable, brazen shooting that puts innocent people at risk.
As police filmed the crime scene, haunting music still played throughout the hotel.
There was some confusion over the identity of the victim at first. The victim was identified originally as a gangster, but it wasn't Sundip Duhre. It was misidentified. However, as soon as we determined that it was Sundip Duhre, it would have been clearly gang-related because we were at a height of a gang conflict involving two super groups, I guess, of gangsters, of which Duhre was a central figure.
Two sets of brothers had aligned to form the Duhre group, an enemy of the Wolfpack.
Along with dozens of foot soldiers, the Duhres and their associates had a stronghold on the Fraser Valley drug trade and were suspected of being involved in the shooting that left 30-year-old Jonathan Bacon dead. At 36, Duhre dodged the bullet longer than most.
The latest outbreak is connected to the targeted hit of Gurmeet Dak at Metrotown. So that's what's precipitated the latest round of violence in our region.
Money is the number one thing, money and power. It's such a lucrative business, the underworld. Sundip, he was an intelligent and a smart person. He has a lot of friends, he knows a lot of people. Everybody in that world, they do get enemies, but somebody that's been around that long, they have a lot of respect in that world, and nobody's gonna let this just slide.
You could surmise, just given who Duhre was and who his foes were, you could draw the conclusion, the presumption that it had to do with the opposing group in the gang conflict, which was generally the Wolfpack Alliance. But as far as who the actual suspects were, that would have taken some investigation.
It was the Duhre gang against the Wolfpack, the targets in the Kelowna shooting. And police were worried about the gunfire brazenly blasting between the two groups.
We're also always concerned about innocent bystanders being caught in the crossfire. And that's why, again, we have firearms addiction teams out. We have proactive gang enforcement out on the streets as well.
The Wolfpack wasn't finished hunting. And across the country, in Toronto, they were eyeing one of their own as prey. His name was John Raposo. 5 months after the Vancouver shooting, he was tracked to his favorite hangout, the Sicilian Sidewalk Cafe. The patio was packed for a Euro Cup game between Italy and Ireland.
An unknown person enters the patio by himself and seats at a table by himself. He's dressed in a construction-style outfit, orders a beverage from the staff, and while the staff are in the process of getting that order for him, he then gets up and engages our victim and shoots him point blank multiple times before fleeing the area on foot.
I heard, 4 loud pops, but I thought it was somebody letting off firecrackers or something because of the Italian game.
Just heard some gunshots, about 4 or 5 gunshots, and just saw everybody running. And that was about it. It's pretty freaky.
What I can confirm is 2 victims right now. Our homicide squad is on scene, however, they've just arrived as well. So I don't have anything further on the victims.
The victim had frequented that location many times. He was from the neighborhood. As a matter of fact, he was known by almost everyone that attends that location. He was a family man. He had a child and had another one on the way.
I think Raposo was set up by people he trusted. The hitman didn't search around for him. He knew where to find him exactly.
Raposo was sitting at the Sicilian Sidewalk Cafe with Freddie Patriarca, also known as Fat Freddy.
Fat Freddy had some major debts, and this was a way to wipe them clean by basically being the marker who sets up Raposo.
Fat Freddy was shot too, although he survived those injuries.
The person who did the killing wasn't a great humanitarian or a great marksman. That was just part of the price of business.
There were numerous witnesses, and of course, no 2 people see things exactly the same way, but each of them collectively described this unknown person seated, looking out of place. Many made reference to a wig that he was wearing, and he appeared to be very clean, which is not something that one would expect for a construction worker mid-afternoon.
Pretty brazen attack, and he was calm, cool, and collected, and just strolled off after he committed the homicide.
Raposo was charged in the mid-1990s with a variety of offenses, including extortion, aggravated assault, and possession of stolen property. Those charges were all withdrawn. At the time of his murder, he was before the courts on charges of aggravated assault and dangerous operation of a motor vehicle.
The casket of 35-year-old John Raposo was carried into church, flanked by family, including the mother of his unborn child and his 17-month-old toddler.
This is a very extensive investigation that we're conducting. This is the very beginning of that investigation. There is a lot of legwork still to do.
The focus of our investigation is the actual shooter proper.
We can't identify the shooter because of a court order, but police had been keeping an eye on him because of other alleged crimes. Guns were found in a search of his place in BC, as well as handcuffs, a face mask, and wigs. And on a previous visit to Toronto, police followed him as he cruised by Raposo's house. But the shooter got spooked before he carried out the hit. He messaged a friend that he was being followed by a 10-car surveillance team. The hitman didn't give up, though. He returned to BC and then tried to shake his tail by catching a bus to Calgary before traveling on to Toronto using fake ID. The gunman then went shopping at Eden Centre. He bought batting gloves, black pants, and other dark clothing.
And so the shooter was arrested on June the 21st of 2012.
The hitman had $40,000 in cash when he was arrested in a Toronto taxi, just 3 days after Raposo was killed.
The part that sticks out with me was that he was arrested and they said, "You're under arrest for murder," and he said, "Which one?"
In their hunt for the men who ordered the hit on John Raposo, Toronto police started taking a closer look at some of the victim's business associates, the Wolfpack. And Vancouver detectives were closing in on the same kingpin in their investigation of Sundip Duhre's murder at the Sheridan Wall Centre.
Rabih Alkhalil, his name came up as someone who was of interest.
Well, the Alkhalil family had been on our radar, not just our radar, but all law enforcement's radar for quite some time. What really brought the Alkhalil family to prominence was propensity for violence.
There was 5 brothers in all and 2 sisters. 3 of the brothers had been murdered, 1 in Surrey, 1 in Vancouver, 1 in Mexico. The Alkhalil family, they moved out of Surrey into Vancouver for a short period of time, and then ultimately they moved out to the Ottawa region.
The long history of violence began with one murder of one of the Alkhalil brothers in the Lower Mainland area, which resulted in retaliation, and it just grew from there. The risk to the general public was quite high. That really elevated the priority for us here in Ottawa. So we were aware that the family was here and had embedded themselves in the criminal world, predominantly in the drug trafficking world.
They basically were able to outpace other drug traffickers. They ended up being quite powerful in and around the Ottawa region. One inspector characterized it as a hostile takeover like you would do in business.
Rabih was already subject to other investigations.
Rabih was the youngest of the Alkhalil brothers. And in Montreal, he was living with Hell's Angel Larry Amero, the Wolfpack member who was injured in that shooting at Kelowna's Delta Grand Hotel.
These guys obviously could have afforded their own places, but they preferred to, have each other's back.
Put it this way, I would say that they would be close business partners.
It used to be Montreal was like the Mecca, and this was 2 guys relatively young just coming in there and being comfortable. It showed that the Hells Angels just weren't what they used to be. Things were collapsing for them. The police had done a pretty good job against them.
So there was a power vacuum in Montreal and Rabih Alkhalil was looking to cash in on it?
Yeah, and also there was heat in Ottawa. And then Montreal is a really, really pivotal city because it's 385 miles from New York City, which is a phenomenal market. It's also a port city, so it's really easy to bring drugs into Montreal.
In August of 2012, police moved in to search the Wolfpack's den in Montreal. 1 year after the murder of Jonathan Bacon in Kelowna, there was still a framed photo of Amero with a gunned-down gangster on display. Perhaps a reminder that revenge was still needed. It looked like the roommates left in a hurry. Stacks of cash were left on the bedside table, a Hells Angels vest abandoned in the closet.
As Projet Locasse was about to make the arrest, Rabih was able to flee.
This is a guy with really, really next level intelligence.
Rabih Alkhalil fled the country when a number of search warrants were executed by the Vancouver Police Homicide Unit in Quebec. We believe he was working in concert with other suspects who were present and actively involved in the murder at that time. This investigation is not over. We are pursuing charges against all of the parties involved. He was at large. He was out of the country, in the wind. They didn't know where he was.
Alkhalil has been known to frequent the Ottawa and Montreal areas and also has contacts in Vancouver, British Columbia.
And it was quite some time later he turned up in Greece and was found to have a false passport and was taken into custody by Greek authorities.
There was a watch for him internationally through Interpol.
Based on our own intelligence gathering, there was a decision that the best way to return him would be by a chartered plane.
The risk was high on an escape level. He's a very intelligent individual, he's very smart, he's crafty, and we believe that if anyone was able to mount an escape, that he may be that guy.
Right out of the movies, I guess, we met him on the tarmac. A Congo line of police vehicles or security vehicles brought him and they handed him over to us.
And what's Rabih Alkhalil's demeanor like when you're with him on the plane?
I can tell you he was polite and respectful to me. Some of it was just small talk, but it was not a cold stare-off, if you will.
Upon Rabih Alkhalil's extradition back to Canada in 2015, he first faced court in Toronto for the murder of John Raposo.
Police say Raposo was targeted, the victim of an alleged plot involving organized crime, that he was associated with those accused of his murder, all with alleged ties to a massive drug ring.
That investigation was into importation of cocaine into Canada, and it led to us discovering that 110 kilos in a warehouse in Niagara Falls.
There were 4 of them in on a cocaine deal.
Those 4 people were the victim, John Raposo, and members or allies of the Wolfpack, Rabih Alkhalil, Nicola Nero, and Martino Caputo.
As the cocaine got closer to Toronto, it was pretty simple math that if there were 3 of them, they'd make a lot more money. Nick Nero had a real dislike for Raposo. For some reason, he just didn't like his attitude, and so started spreading rumors about Raposo that I don't think were true, but that he was a police informer. Nobody stuck up for Raposo.
The Wolfpack didn't see any money for that drug deal, though, because police found their cocaine first.
There was Mexican drug cartel markings on the product.
Surveillance video of Rabih Alkhalil helped tie him to the killing. He was seen renting this Chevrolet Impala for his hitman, who was then followed by police as he did a drive-by scouting mission past Raposo's home. And items in the vehicle were covered in the hitman's fingerprints. In 2017, Alkhalil and the shooter faced trial with 2 other Wolfpack members, Nicola Nero and Martino Caputo.
If you just walked in and you didn't know anything about the case, you would quite quickly decide that Alkhalil is the most important guy in the room. Caputo was connected to the Montreal mob. The Montreal Mafia isn't what it used to be. He seemed a bit like a fish out of water. Nero seemed like the village idiot. If they hadn't taken Nero in, they probably would have gotten away with it. What Nero did that was just sort of breathtakingly stupid was there was a password to their encrypted network and Nero couldn't remember it, so he put it on a post-it note. And so when police went into his place, they saw the password. For a guy like Alkhalil who goes to all this effort to get servers offshore and change the phones all the time, I know that one had police laughing. One cop after they got Nero said there's no cure for stupid. And it was sort of interesting to see him up against Alkhalil, where Alkhalil was next level, doing things that other people didn't even understand, but they all worked.
That password on a post-it note helped police crack 2 murder cases, pegging members of the Wolfpack to the killings of both John Raposo in Toronto and Sundip Duhre in Vancouver.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, that's where you got the message about the Toronto hitman, where Alkhalil says we should send you to sniper school. Alkhalil also said it's been a busy week. I buried 2 guys up north. It's kind of hard to talk your way out of that. I think you could see that the ship was sinking.
The messages described a human safari, spottings and close calls as would-be killers hunted for their prey.
In court today, all 4 men were looking around the room, smiling at their families who were seated in the front row. The jury then delivered their verdict, all guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Alkhalil didn't look deflated, he just looked irritated. It's sort of like he did his job right, but someone else was more stupid than he could have imagined. He looks like someone who's always thinking, what's the next move?
Welcome back. After Rabih Alkhalil is convicted of murdering one of his Wolfpack associates in Toronto, he's flown to Vancouver to face yet another murder trial. We now return to Jules Knox with the hunt for the Wolfpack.
A decade after Sundip Duhre's murder at Vancouver's Sheridan Wall Centre, Rabih Alkhalil faced trial for the killing of his drug-dealing rival.
Alkhalil was caught on surveillance video in the vicinity, though was not alleged to be one of the shooters.
They arrive before the shooter arrives. You know, they appear to be scouting out the place, checking out where everything is, etc. They make their way around.
Sundip Duhre had gone in with a friend, sat at this table by the window.
You see Alkhalil and an associate end up seated at the bar, and then around the corner is where Duhre is.
Duhre's friend left the table and walked past Alkhalil at the bar. He paused to talk to the Cuban soccer team in the lobby on his way out for a smoke. 7 seconds after the friend walked out, the shooter walked in. Because of a publication ban, the suspect who has been arrested cannot be named, and we've had to blur this gunman.
He arrives nearby, comes in disguise through the revolving glass doors into the lobby. In the lobby, there's a number of people milling about. When you slow down the video to a frame by frame, it appears that he nods acknowledgement, and there's some form of acknowledgement between Alkhalil and the shooter. The shooter then walks directly through the lounge area and goes around the corner towards where we presume where Duhre is, and he's out of sight. You see Alkhalil go up to the guest services desk, and then seconds later, you can tell by all the various videos that something has happened that's quite remarkable.
Rabih Alkhalil was put on trial with his old roommate Larry Amero, the Wolfpack member who was seriously injured in the shooting at Kelowna's Delta Grand Hotel, and who appeared to hold a grudge over the killing of his buddy, Jonathan Bacon.
The Crown theory was that the Kelowna shooting with this high-profile Red Scorpion dead, with Larry Amero seriously injured, was believed to be the motive about why Sundip Duhre was targeted.
Interestingly enough, less than an hour before the murder at the Sheraton Wall Center, Rabih Alkhalil was seen walking down the street with another one of the Wolfpack members who survived the Kelowna shooting, James Riach. They parted ways, and Riach went into the 7-Eleven. You might recognize him as this man, who blended into the crowd after gunfire erupted in Kelowna. He wasn't charged in Duhre's murder, but he was a person of interest in the revenge killing.
Investigators from Vancouver obtained enough grounds to execute a search warrant at Amero and Alkhalil's place of residence. There was evidence obtained during the course of that search that amplified the culpability of Alkhalil in the Duhre murder.
Also key in pinning Amero and Alkhalil to the murder was that post-it note with a password that police found in a search of a different gangster's home. It let police read the Wolfpack's encrypted conversations.
The main evidence against them were their own utterances. Once police seized phones for the conspiracy to import cocaine, they also have the evidence on those phones that's related to murder conspiracies.
The motive for murder, a feud dating back decades. This gang war was an escalating series of revenge killings that largely started with the two sides competing to control drug territory.
The feud is really between the Duhres and the Alkhalils, and it goes back to when they were young men, even teenagers, if you will, involved in the drug trade.
The Alkhalils, I assume that they felt that they were powerful enough to muscle in on a pretty well-established UN DAC-Duhre alliance, and that led to the conflict. And that's when bodies really started to drop.
While Rabih Alkhalil's trial was underway, he was held at the North Fraser Pretrial Center in Surrey.
My phone starts blowing up, and I see Alkhalil's escaped. You know, it was still early evening. It had happened within an hour of getting these messages, and I'm like, oh my God, oh my God.
Rabih Alkhalil escaped just before 7 p.m. on July 21st, 2022. RCMP said they were notified 40 minutes later.
We see on the surveillance video 2 people posing as contractors. They wore masks over their faces. They had real identification that they left. And these guys used a plasma torch to cut through from part of the jail into the yard so he could go into the area that they were in. He got this vest on. You see them getting into a white van. They take off. The van was later abandoned.
RCMP said they were notified 40 minutes later.
He was given a huge running head start, and he was about 48 minutes from the American border.
Police should have been notified way earlier. I don't understand why there was that big gap in time. What if Alkhalil had gone on a crazy shootout? What if his plan wasn't as sophisticated as it ended up being, and they had to carjack a car to get away? Myself and no doubt other journalists were hearing from sources within less than an hour, and yet it took several hours before the public was notified.
Alkhalil's connections range from across Canada to the United States, Europe, and Asia. A Canada-wide arrest warrant and an Interpol red notice are being prepared. Police believe we have identified the two suspects based on those identifications. It is more important than ever that we find Alkhalil.
When the Coquitlam RCMP released photos of the suspects, it didn't take long before online sleuths sort of alerted some of us in the media that these pictures were stock photos that could be purchased online. And it was very embarrassing, and it took a full day for police to admit that they had put out bogus photos.
I'm absolutely certain his escape was an inside job. You can't look at Alkhalil's story and not think about corruption.
Somehow those people had a real list of contractors because they took the name of someone that was on that list. They also were at the pretrial center prior to the escape. So they basically were doing a scouting mission.
Immediately, I thought of the Keystone Cops. That's how bad it was. A total disaster from a public policy policing point of view.
There will most definitely be a full-scale review and investigation into what happened and how it happened.
But the province refuses to release its report into Rabih Alkhalil's escape.
We're in the middle of a trial. It's a jury trial. This is a huge story. We have to do this story. And there are a lot of restrictions on what we're allowed to say. You know, it's highly prejudicial if you write that someone's escaped from prison when the jury is not even being told he's in prison. You know, at this point, he was already convicted of murder in Ontario. But again, that was a secret from the jury.
A dangerous gangster facing murder charges. To me, it's a slap in the face to the justice system that an individual like that can escape.
After a cunning jailbreak, as his murder trial was ongoing, authorities are left scrambling to find gangster Rabih Alkhalil. We return now to Jules Knox with the conclusion of the hunt for the Wolfpack.
Shortly after, this white van pulled away from the North Fraser pretrial center with Rabih Alkhalil inside. The murderer became the most wanted man in Canada.
I heard he was out of the country within an hour.
Given the geographic location, he certainly had options. You've got Pacific Ocean is right there, or going across to a relatively close U.S. border. All it takes is to get across that border, and once he's across, and the U.S. is a big country, he can go just about anywhere.
I don't think he is in Asia, because Asia, when you look at BC criminal organizations, is more or less controlled by the United Nations gang. So those would be his enemies. You know, his brother was living in Mexico. I've heard that he has good connections in Panama, but I think most likely he is in the Middle East, where his family has connections.
There was also a rumor that Rabih Alkhalil fled to Dubai.
The trial was continuing, so I went to court the next morning. We thought the whole trial might go off the rails. It was very, very tense. The judge, she worked with the Crown and Defense to draft a statement that would be given to the jury about him essentially absconding and that they were going to carry on with the trial.
5 weeks later, Rabih Alkhalil was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Sundip Duhre. His ex-roommate, Larry Amero, was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. And both men were found guilty of plotting to kill Souk Dak, Duhre's gang associate who was gunned down less than a year after Duhre died.
Alkhalil was facing the most serious charges, and yet Amero was the only one sitting in court to hear the verdict. Rabih Alkhalil at the time he escaped, was a month away from having a second first-degree murder conviction. So he was desperate. He was facing the rest of his life behind bars in his mid-30s.
He's pretty crafty. He's going to have to find himself a place where he can live undetected, or be in a place where he has some influence over law enforcement. Most people would change their appearance. He's probably changed his appearance. He will do anything in his power to survive and live his life outside of custody.
He's capable of having people killed at the drop of a hat. So I would suggest to you that he's extremely dangerous.
I think it's a real black eye on the Canadian justice system when someone who's already convicted of one murder and subsequently convicted of another murder is able to walk out of a government institution and escape. I don't think he'll ever be found.
There's a lot of things that he's done where you just wonder how did he do it, and then a year later you're still wondering how did he do it. I don't want to glorify the guy, but sometimes you feel like you're watching Mission Impossible. He's only 37. I mean, the biggest mafia guy we had in Canada, he had to wait till he was 66 to get the top job, Vito Rizzuto. This guy, Rabih Alkhalil, he's 37 now. I mean, it's kind of astounding. A lot of what we've been talking about he did when he was in his 20s.
The family came as refugees. They were stateless. He was born in Saudi Arabia, I believe, but they're Palestinians. And they came to Canada because they wanted a better life for their kids. And yet, all they've really seen is death and destruction. This criminal feud between the Duhres and the Alkhalils has destroyed 2 families and countless other lives.
3 men were arrested for the brazen shooting of Jonathan Bacon in Kelowna that triggered the Wolfpack's revenge killing of Sundip Duhre.
Triggerman Jason McBride handed a life sentence for second-degree murder with no chance of parole for 18 years. Getaway driver Michael Jones and suspected shooter Jujar Kunkun each sentenced to 18 years for conspiracy to commit murder.
We talk about, this gang conflict on the Lower Mainland. Police have recently said, oh, gee, it's a BC-wide conflict. I would argue that this conflict, which maybe started in some instances amongst teenagers in schoolyards in the greater Vancouver area, is now an international conflict with international connections. We can't pretend these are, this is just a small side issue in Vancouver when there are those international tentacles.
A couple of weeks before Sundip Duhre was shot at the Wall Center, I ran into him and he came over to me and said, could I talk to you for a minute? So I went over and sat with him for a minute, and he said, thank you for everything you've done. It's too late for me, but what you need to focus on to make sure the kids don't get involved in this lifestyle. He says, I'm gonna end up dead sometime, but I know that, but I can't get out of it. But he took it upon himself to tell me, you've got to make sure our young kids don't carry on into this lifestyle. So 2 weeks later, he was gunned down in the Wall Center.
What kind of impact has this had on John Raposo's family?
An incredible impact. It's still too tough for them to speak about this. He is missed, I would suspect, almost as much today as when it happened.
The Wolfpack is still hunted by police, as well as rival gangsters looking for revenge. And Rabih Alkhalil is still at large.
We don't have any arrests, we don't have anything. We've just got a bunch of stories about where's Rabih.
Despite the influence of someone like Rabih Alkhalil, there's always someone who wants that guy dead.
Every dog has his day. They only need to make one mistake. I think that'll happen.
Larry Amero is now appealing his 18-year sentence for conspiracy to commit the murder of Sundip Duhre. He is asking for a new trial or a lesser sentence. Meanwhile, the Crown wants the judge to up his jail time to life in prison. James Riach, the gangster who escaped serious injury in the Kelowna shooting, has been sentenced to life in prison in the Philippines for his involvement in a drug trafficking ring. Rabih Alkhalil has been on the run since July of 2022. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast, now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.